Liminal spaces. I've loved them for years, but I never thought that I'd ever have anything to contribute to the discussion. Because when you consume and reconsume media for long enough, and you cave into the fan theories, iceberg videos, and video essay phase, you end up feeling like everything has already been said before. But then when I thought about it for more than like 2 seconds, I realized that I still had a lot to say. Like, at least 20 minutes worth of stuff to say. This past summer, I went to the airport for the first time. Well, not the first time, but it was the first time that I was going to the airport because I was going to be the one flying. Before then, I had been to the airport dozens of times, to drop off relatives, meet distant cousins, but all when I had barely formed a consciousness. All I was focused on was not being able to see my mom or my brother, not the fact that airports are probably as liminal gets. It occurred to me multiple times, while going through checks, waiting in lines, grabbing food and water, how disconnected I felt from the entire experience of traveling. It felt like stepping out of my body while still being in it. Big, bright signs everywhere, blinding anyone who had to wake up early for their flight. Tall ceilings, screens that looked like they were built to overload you with information. The slight anxious pit in your stomach, because when this much authority is around, you just feel like you've done something wrong. Endless carpeted hallways, pins and needles in your feet from having to walk everywhere, slight dehydration from having to repeatedly empty out your water bottle. I hated it. But at the same time, I don't remember the last time that I felt more at peace. Why is that? I'm sure you know what a liminal space is. I don't need to define it for you. If you clicked onto this video because somehow you don't, an image speaks 1,000 words. A liminal space is a space or time of transition between 2 points. When you take an elevator, you're trying to go from one point to another. When you get on a plane, you're going from where you're starting to where you'll end up. When you walk down a hallway, you're going from where you were to a desired destination. The reason you go to school is to be able to go from elementary to middle to high school, and most of the time, college or university. You see what I mean? Liminal spaces are literally everywhere. Yet, they're like one of the least acknowledged things in the day-to-day. Most people don't really think that deeply about the fact that they're about to board a plane, or hop onto an elevator, or wake up for another day of school. Because quite frankly, if we were to, it would drive you a bit insane. The term uncanny valley was popularized in 2020, but to be honest, when it was popular, I didn't really know what it meant. Okay, well, I knew that uncanny valley meant scary lady with eyes that were too small for her face, but I didn't really have a definition to put to it. Uncanny valley is the feeling that humans get when we're faced with something that is almost exactly our normal, but has something slightly wrong with it, like the disproportionate eyes that I mentioned earlier. The example that people usually use when talking about this is robots that are made to look like humans. Because, of course, you'll never be able to 100% replicate what a human looks like. A human is a human and a robot is a robot. But they still try their best, which leaves you with this kind of half disoriented and nauseated feeling. There's a disconnect between what your brain knows and what it's seeing, and that disconnect is what makes you want to look away after staring at something like this for too long. One of the most popular genres of backrooms images are ones with monsters or entities, as they're called in the context of the Backrooms or the Backrooms series. And those tap into that exact feeling. Tall, shadowy, sometimes very skinny and lanky fingers. The thing is, they're all shaped like humans or parts of humans that we can recognize. Except, because of their obvious differences, they seem a lot more threatening than the monster under your bed that we all imagined when we were kids. Things like facelings, skin stealers, and transporters. Every day, you're constantly going in and out of liminal spaces. But like, half the time, you don't even think about the fact that you are. You don't think about the fact that you're about to take an elevator or board a plane before you actually do it, because it's become second nature to you. When you become too aware of these things, that's when things like dissociation can set in. Feeling disconnected from your thoughts, feelings, environment, or even your own body. Which again, isn't at all a pleasant experience, but can feel very comforting when you know that you're the one in control of that feeling. Becoming aware that you're in a liminal space can feel so surreal. It kind of reminds me of the obsession that we have with finding a meaning to life, which is usually where people point out the fact that life is probably a simulation. Because life feels so uncontrollable, our natural instinct is to try and find that control in nonsensical ways. I think all the time about the fact that I'm in so many liminal spaces almost every day, especially because of and thanks to liminal spaces in my life. Because my brothers moved out of my house, I'm seeing a lot more empty hallways. Because my mom gets off work 30 minutes to a few hours after my school day ends, I'm constantly forced to stay in completely empty hallways, libraries, and cafeterias. Or just conveniently stumbling upon one, like what happened to me the other day when I stopped by my local superstore for a couple of things. They'd spent the last 2 years slowly rearranging each part of their store, and this section was the newest. So I forced my mom to move out of the way to take a picture. I don't know, something about the sliver of shelf that's showing between the rest of them is almost perfectly stacked just made me feel like I was in a movie. Like everything was too perfect, to the point where it felt like it wasn't real. I vividly remember getting so badly tricked by creepy and copypastas that I would find strangers on Omegle to send the copypastas to, just to be safe. When I was at the iPad kid age of around 7 to 10, I was surrounded by creepypastas, the most popular one obviously being Slenderman. But I remember being absolutely terrified of Smile Dog. And even when I was actively trying to avoid creepypastas, they still showed up everywhere. I vividly remember there was a girl on my bus who was a senior at the time that we were on the same bus. Well, senior in that school since it was grade 1 to 8, so she was in 8th grade. But to 3rd grade me, she felt a lot older. And almost every day, she would tell everyone in the bus creepypastas. I kid you not, bro. We locked in like she was telling us ghost stories around a campfire. Everyone was hitting this pose. When I was younger, every time I got a new creepypasta thrown at me, I would rack my brain trying to figure out why people like these so much. I mean, why would you willingly consume something that you knew had a chance of keeping you awake at night or giving you nightmares? Same reason why I don't understand why people love horror movies so much, but I digress. And when I thought about it as a kid, and even now, I really couldn't wrap my head around it. But when I looked through Google for 2 seconds, I found that most people like them because of the adrenaline rush of getting scared, but having that fear be in your control. Think of the last time that you felt scared. A jump scare from a video game or movie, a friend or family member sneaking up on you, a nightmare, an alarm going off. No matter if these scares are long-term or short, big or small, when, how, and why they happen are usually completely out of your control. But in this case, you have that aspect of control that everybody in life so desperately wants at every turn. Being able to express and engage in the danger around your world that you don't always have control over. You get to feel the adrenaline of being chased, hunted, or followed without actually being in danger. Creepypastas also build a big sense of community, the same type of online community that's been built around the Backrooms and the Backrooms series. Almost a year ago now, when Anthony Padilla, now Smosh alike, made a video interviewing VFX artist Kane Pixels. Watching it made me realize that I'd known of the Backrooms and liminal spaces for years, but had somehow never watched the Backrooms series. So like any normal person would, the following day I binge watched every video in the series that was out at that point in like 4 hours. And after I finished it all, again like any normal person, I was itching to talk about it with someone. I spent an entire 45-minute lunch the following week explaining the entire storyline, or at least what I understood of it thanks to film theory, to one of my friends. And then spent a good 2 weeks after that begging her to watch it for herself so we could talk about it together. I'm a part of so many fandoms myself that adding the Backrooms and liminal spaces to my list didn't really seem like much. But what if I told you that being a part of a fandom, even if it's just one, is a natural instinct? And this goes back as far as hundreds of thousands of years ago. Being a part of a community, feeling welcomed and loved in your everyday, or in our ancestors' case, being a part of a tribe. Whether it's a form of escapism from lack of that sense of belonging from parts in your life where you should be feeling it, or it's a source for you to feel like you can be unapologetically yourself, especially in a world where everything is popular before it becomes cringe. Being a part of a fandom isn't out of the ordinary. And even if you don't think that you're in one, you most likely are or have been at least once in your life. To name a few examples: Harry Potter, Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Avatar, The Hunger Games, Heartstopper, Supernatural, Pokemon, Criminal Minds, Maze Runners, Disney, Naruto, MCU, Percy Jackson, One Direction, Twilight, Warrior Cats, Dan and Phil, Minecraft, FNAF, The Amazing Digital Circus, Panic at the Disco, Gravity Falls, Studio Ghibli, Stranger Things, Dune, Scott Pilgrim, Clueless, Mean Girls, Heathers, Alien Stage, The Summer I Turned Pretty, Hamilton, Beetlejuice. I could keep going. Literally any anime, movie, interest, hobby, book, TV show, series that you've ever been passionate about. Because all all it takes to be in a fandom is to be passionate. That's what MatPat meant when he said we're all theorists. Just like any other fandom, the liminal space fandom builds community. Not only because it feels that good to be a part of something, but because this fandom quite literally builds off itself. There is no official be-all end-all canon, like TV shows and movies and books have. The Backrooms was literally just a 4chan user with a dream, and the rest of the internet just took it from there. That's why, if you look for them, there are so many different Backrooms wikis, all with drastically contradicting material. A fandom with less rules than your average one is going to be a funner one to be a part of by nature. The most common theme in liminal spaces, and the feeling that you get when you look at them or encounter one in real life, is nostalgia. Yearning for a childhood that you miss or wish you had, which is exactly why this creates such a strong sense of community in the online space. It's something that we can all relate to. Awkward birthday parties at fast food places, the toy corner at your local doctor's office or dentist, the playground that never got old, your favorite stuffed animal or toy or pillow that you couldn't let go of no matter how disheveled it got, getting everything in your favorite color no matter how insignificant, driving home late from your cousin's house and being able to feel that one turn that wakes you up, ball pits, overly colorful indoor parks, beige or yellow doors, ceilings, floors, carpets, furniture that were all once white but got stained from you and your siblings over the years. They're all things that we can easily bond over in a space like the internet, where everyone is so vastly unique. Because even though uniqueness is amazing and usually what draws us to each other, relatability is how we make those initial connections. And relating in a way like this makes being in this world seem just a little less scary. If you've been practically anywhere on the internet recently, you've probably heard of the amazing digital circus. Oh, you haven't?
I hope we all have a fun game, no matter who ends up winning.
I want to kill that guy.
Press!
This is so heavy.
New sports invented by yours truly.
Help me, Kane.
Oh, Zubul, you mismatched cash piano, I'll tear you to pieces. Constructive criticism would be greatly appreciated.
One of the first things that I noticed about the digital circus, literally minutes into the pilot, was how much the circus reminded me of the backrooms and liminal spaces in general. I mean, just look at the frames of the inside of the circus. This is literally a genre of liminal space pictures in and of itself. What I think really ties it all in as feeling so liminal is the fact that all the circus members don't fully know how the circus works. And if they do find out about an aspect of it, it's never fully explained, or the explanation that they do get is very nonsensical. It's literally the nature of liminal spaces. Being plopped in a foreign place against your will that feels oddly familiar, but that familiarity doesn't even help you because nothing about this place makes sense. The fact that I got into this show just a few months after binge watching the entire Backroom series feels kind of convenient because it immediately filled the gap that had been developed in my heart for more Backrooms adjacent content. But the digital circus isn't the only piece of media with a noticeably liminal feeling. Things like The Shining, The Twilight Zone, Stranger Things, Severance, Mario 64, Silent Hill, Twin Peaks, The Truman Show, early Minecraft, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and Vivarium give off such a liminal feeling that looking at just these frames, it almost feels like I'm actually there. Something that made me stupidly happy once I realized was that one of the main aspects of any given liminal space image, and especially the popular ones, is a strategic use of negative space. Negative space in art is usually used to create stuff like this, or this, intentionally leaving a lot of space around or in an image to force the viewer to see or notice certain things. I really like what this Reddit user had to say about negative space. The fact that when we see an empty space, we usually associate it with something being unfinished, which is why it feels so unsettling to see things like living rooms with minimal furniture or grocery stores with completely empty shelves. We know that that's the state of how those places are before they've become the finished product. So once we're told that that is the finished product, it kind of messes with us in a way that we can't always control. Because the more you try and not focus on the emptiness of liminal spaces, the more apparent it feels. Since I've noticed it, negative space has been one of my favorite techniques in art. I really love using bits art as an example, because they're literally what made me become aware of negative spaces in the first place. So if you have any other liminal space artists that you love, or just artists that really utilize negative space, please let me know because I'd love to check them out. I know that I'm not the only one who's noticed this generation's, whenever I say this, I feel like a fucking grandpa, obsession with old things and nostalgia. Everything is now aesthetic or a trend to look back on. Every edit audio holds a memory. Physical media is cooler than their online equivalent again. It's everywhere. But it's not really a question of why Gen Z specifically loves nostalgia. It's about the role that nostalgia serves anyone. A distraction from your current life. Your parents reminiscing about the good old days, their prime, their glory days. They didn't do that fresh out of high school or uni. They're doing that now, when they're middle-aged, and the first thing that they think of when they wake up is if they're going to be able to make ends meet to pay off all their crippling debt. Even if it's just for a few minutes, with friends, at a party, reunion, or even just by yourself. You get to feel a sense of control over your life. Over what you're feeling. Because living in the past will always feel better than having to deal with the present or the future. The backrooms and liminal space aesthetic really kicked off during the pandemic, when we had no control over what was going on in our lives, and needed a reliable source of comfort, which is why, simultaneously, the 2000s aesthetic started to become fairly popular as well, and so did the concept of aesthetic in general, to be honest. Even though nostalgia seems like a sweet concept, we tend to romanticize a lot about life, especially stuff that seems familiar, and twist the narrative to the point where we see the past with rose-tinted glasses, which is exactly why we get a vast amount of people who claim to feel nostalgic for 2020, even though it wasn't even that long ago. But even though it seems nonsensical, it makes sense. If you think about it, the vast majority of people who were forced into lockdown were teenagers, people near the end of their middle school or just starting high school, who got a lot of their classic experiences taken away from them. Graduation, going to prom, first or last days of school, field trips, performances, all things that mostly every kid experiences at one point or another. And when you miss that opportunity completely and are expected to move on with your life once the world goes back to normal, it can feel like something's missing, and you try to find that something by refusing to grow up. From just a quick search, you'll find hundreds of thousands of young adults admitting how terrified they are to graduate, go into post-secondary education, move out, get a long-term job, because the years that they were supposed to have to experiment and have those embarrassing moments, awkward dances, failed relationships, they've missed those fundamental years, which has left many feeling mentally younger than they actually are. So it makes sense why in the liminal space community, there's a large amount of liminal spaces that are very overtly pastel and childlike. It's something that we've never gotten to fully experience, and somehow we'll always miss. One thing that I realized while collecting images for this video is the fact that some liminal space pictures that I was finding really didn't feel that liminal to me. And I started to wonder, why do some liminal spaces feel more liminal than others? So I started to collect some of the images that didn't feel liminal to me and tried to spot some key differences. But they kind of all contain the same things. Long hallways, constant beige, dreamlike brightness, settings and environments that don't make sense. What I realized eventually was that they didn't feel liminal to me because of my own unintentional bias. Everybody looks at life through the lens of their past experiences. We can't help it, and we can't change it. Your first instinct when you look at any type of outside stimulus is usually always going to be what you would do or are going to do, not what some other hypothetical person would do. That right there is exactly why a select few of these don't click with me, because I'm looking at all of these through the lens of my own life and my childhood. People who've had different childhood experiences will feel nostalgia for different things. And since I can do this, I'm actually curious, are there any of those non-liminal liminal spaces pictures that I showed you that gave you guys a liminal feeling? Because if so, I'd really love to know, and why. While looking for pictures to have rolling for this video, I started noticing different genres of liminal space photos and common themes that usually show up in liminal space photos that go viral. This list includes, but is not limited to, chairs. Usually either too many or too little of them. Places like these, where chairs are meant to be arranged perfectly. Chairs being arranged awkwardly on purpose just to make you feel more uneasy. Or chairs that are positioned in a way that forces you to imagine that people have either been there or are planning to be there. Pool rooms are some of the most popular genres of liminal space photos. Usually they're ones that are obviously edited because the lighting is 100% natural, which is just not possible in most places. but dim ones can feel just as dreamlike. This is here for obvious reasons. We all went to school. There are like little to no places in a school that usually has nobody in it at any given time, so you can find basically any part of a basic school as a liminal space photo. Doors are probably one of my favorites, especially ones that look like they lead to pitch black or nothing, because it plays into the idea of not knowing even more than liminal spaces themselves. Again, this is mostly done with editing or rendering stuff in things like Blender, just things in architecture that wouldn't be physically possible to replicate in real life. The popularity of this color honestly probably comes from the original Backrooms image. Still always makes me feel nostalgic though, probably because of the amount of everyday places that use yellow lights instead of straight white lights. This usually shows up in places like parks and ball pits, but sometimes it can also be used as intentional contrast in grayish or yellowish areas or scenery. These types of pictures are adjacent to the last, except they're usually always specifically in a childlike context. Places like ice cream or candy shops and bedrooms. Okay, I'm editing and I'm not sure how I didn't already mention this because it's literally like one of the most popular liminal space type of pictures, but pictures with exit signs or like doors leading to exits that aren't really exits. Like I said, I don't know how I didn't mention this. This is literally such a big concept in the digital circus too, so it's relevant. Don't know how I didn't realize that. The other thing is like children's play places, like where you would have like kids' birthday parties or like pizza parties. A lot of it reminds me of FNAF. Like whenever I think of FNAF, I start to think of liminal spaces. The last thing I wanted to mention is dead malls. Like I said, I don't know how I forgot these things because it's literally such a big genre of liminal space photos and probably some of my favorites. I feel like malls are just such a stereotypically populated place, like overpopulated place. It's one of the most jarring types of liminal space pictures in my opinion, because it's kind of something that like everyone can relate to. Like everyone's been to like a crowded mall or a crowded shopping center or store. So that's all I want to add. I love liminal spaces, but when I started to really sit and think of why, I realized that my love for them mostly comes from the unknown. I know, completely the opposite of what people usually like. In fact, the majority of the world's worst fear is the unknown, aka the future. But again, with liminal spaces, you have that sense of control that takes away just enough anxiety for it to be not too scary. As you grow older, you become more and more aware of the world and exactly how horrible it can be, which is why temporary innocence seems so tempting, like a car crash you can't look away from. You feel so uncomfortable looking at liminal spaces that it almost feels comforting in a way, because even though it's still anxiety, it's a different type of anxiety. A type of anxiety that you can handle, that isn't as stressful as your daily life. So you choose it over anything else, over and over and over again. It's like turning your brain off, but in a completely unique and unintentional way.